April 16, 1945. Southern Okinawa, approaching Kakazu Ridge. The 77th Infantry Division watched as 5 Sherman tanks advanced through the early morning mist, engines rumbling low across the muddy terrain. From concealed positions, Japanese soldiers of the elite 62nd Division observed carefully. Standard American armor. Nothing unexpected. Then the lead tank stopped 70 yards from a fortified cave complex, and something unusual happened. Where the main gun should have been, a modified nozzle rotated upward. A sharp hiss cut through the air like escaping steam. In the next instant, a white-hot stream of jellied gasoline erupted from the tank's turret, arcing high into the air before cascading down into the cave entrance like molten rain. The temperature inside the cave spiked to 1400 degrees in 4 seconds. Ammunition exploded in chains. Steel warped. Concrete cracked from thermal shock. The cave's 70 defenders had 3 choices: burn, suffocate, or flee into American machine gun fire. Most chose none, dying before they could decide. This was the M4A3 flame tank, a weapon that would account for 42% of Japanese fortification destructions on Okinawa despite representing only 3% of American armor. Technical Sergeant William Morrison commanded the lead tank, call sign Iron Phoenix. A former Detroit firefighter turned flamethrower tank commander, Morrison would fight for 76 consecutive days, consume 340,000 gallons of napalm, and never speak of his service until 2 weeks before his death in 1997. This is the story of how 5 tanks and their 25-man crews broke the back of Japan's most sophisticated defensive line, and how victory came at a price no one wanted to pay. 3 months earlier, in a classified warehouse at Camp Pendleton, California, Morrison stood beside his tank watching welders attach the final components of the POA-CWS H-1 flamethrower system. The Mark I system, developed by Navy construction battalions in Hawaii and refined after Iwo Jima, represented 18 months of battlefield learning compressed into 400 pounds of pipes, valves, and pressure tanks. Morrison had volunteered for flame tank duty after seeing what portable flamethrowers did to their operators. In previous island campaigns, flamethrower infantry suffered 83% casualty rates. The distinctive twin-fuel tanks on their backs made them priority targets for every Japanese soldier within rifle range. 1 bullet in the fuel tank, and the operator became a human torch. Armor, Morrison reasoned, might improve those odds. His crew thought differently. Corporal James Chen, the gunner, had asked the question they all wondered: "Sarge, what happens if we take a hit to the fuel tanks?" Morrison's answer was technically accurate but not reassuring: "The system uses compressed nitrogen instead of air, so it won't explode." Probably. Probably was not the word Chen wanted to hear. The flame system itself was ingenious in its simplicity and terrifying in its effectiveness. 400 gallons of fuel mixture, a carefully calibrated blend of gasoline, diesel, and napalm powder, sat in armored tanks where the Sherman's 75mm ammunition would normally be stored. Compressed nitrogen at 350 pounds per square inch provided propulsion. An electric igniter at the nozzle turned the liquid stream into blazing death. Maximum range was 180 yards with optimal fuel mixture and windage conditions. Effective range was 120 yards. Minimum safe range, for the targets, was 0. Nothing survived the initial impact. The Marine Corps had learned hard lessons about Japanese defensive tactics. At Peleliu, Saipan, and Iwo Jima, conventional weapons had proven inadequate against fortified caves and underground tunnel systems. Artillery shells that could sink battleships bounced harmlessly off reinforced concrete bunkers. Naval gunfire that could level cities barely scratched positions buried under 20 feet of coral and rock. Infantry assaults against these fortifications produced casualty rates exceeding 40%. Something new was needed. The flame tank was that something. Morrison's crew consisted of 5 men who would live in a 35-ton steel box for the next 76 days. Driver Private Anthony Russo, 19 years old from Brooklyn, who navigated by periscope through terrain that could barely support a man on foot. Assistant Driver Corporal David Kim, who manned the bow machine gun and served as Morrison's second-in-command. Gunner James Chen, responsible for aiming and firing the flamethrower with precision that would determine whether Marines lived or died. Loader Private First Class Thomas O'Brien, who maintained fuel pressure and monitored the system for leaks that could turn the tank into a crematorium. And Morrison himself, the commander, making split-second decisions that balanced tactical objectives against crew survival. They trained for 6 weeks on mock-up Japanese fortifications built by Marine engineers who had studied captured enemy blueprints. The training revealed flamethrower warfare's fundamental challenge: accuracy. Unlike a cannon shell that exploded on impact, napalm flowed like burning water, seeking the lowest point, pooling in depressions, flowing through apertures. A poorly aimed shot wasted precious fuel. A perfectly aimed shot could clear a fortification that artillery couldn't touch. Chen became obsessed with precision. He fired practice rounds for hours, learning how wind affected the napalm stream, how elevation changed range, how fuel viscosity varied with temperature. By the time they shipped to Okinawa, Chen could put napalm through a bunker slit at 100 yards, 9 shots out of 10. That precision would matter. Okinawa was different from previous island campaigns in scale and strategic importance. The island was 60 miles long, 10 miles wide at its broadest point, home to 450,000 civilians, and defended by 110,000 Japanese troops. The Japanese 32nd Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, had spent 8 months preparing defenses that made Iwo Jima look improvised. The southern portion of the island was a fortress. Shuri Castle, an ancient Okinawan landmark, sat atop a ridge system that dominated the terrain for miles. Japanese engineers had carved 3 defensive lines into the ridges, each consisting of hundreds of fortified caves, underground tunnels connecting positions, interlocking fields of fire, and artillery pre-registered on every likely avenue of American advance. Ushijima's strategy was mathematically precise: make the Americans pay 10 casualties for every yard gained, prolonging the battle until the cost became politically unsustainable. Weather would be his ally. The rainy season began in May. American tanks would bog down in mud. Supply lines would stretch. Casualties would mount. Tokyo hoped that a protracted, bloody campaign on Okinawa would make the Americans reconsider invading Japan itself, perhaps accepting a negotiated peace that left the empire intact. It was a delusion, but one backed by 110,000 men willing to die proving it. The American landing on April 1 met minimal resistance. The northern 2/3 of the island fell within 2 weeks. Then the Marines and Army divisions reached the first defensive line at Kakazu Ridge, and the killing started. Kakazu Ridge was a coral and limestone formation 400 feet high, honeycombed with caves that artillery couldn't reach and infantry couldn't assault without catastrophic losses. The 96th Infantry Division attacked on April 9. In 3 days, they suffered 1,200 casualties and gained less than 300 yards. Conventional tactics were failing. On April 16, Morrison's flame tank platoon entered the battle. 5 tanks, call signs Iron Phoenix, Hell's Rain, Demon's Breath, Fury's Child, and Scorched Earth, attached to the 77th Infantry Division with orders to support the assault on Kakazu's western approaches. Morrison had studied the terrain from aerial photos and knew immediately why the infantry was dying. The caves were positioned on the ridge's reverse slope, invisible to naval gunfire. Their entrances faced downhill, meaning anyone approaching moved uphill into enemy fire across open ground. Artillery could pound the ridgeline all day without hitting a single cave entrance. It was a perfect defensive position with one vulnerability: the caves needed ventilation shafts. Fire hot enough and sustained enough would consume all oxygen in the enclosed spaces. The Japanese defenders would suffocate or flee. That was the theory. Reality would be messier. At 0700 hours, Iron Phoenix led the platoon forward. Infantry followed at 75 yards, close enough to exploit any breakthrough but far enough to avoid the heat blast. Morrison's plan was direct: identify cave entrances, saturate them with napalm, then advance before defenders could reorganize. The first target was a cave complex designated Objective Bravo, estimated garrison of 40 to 60 Japanese soldiers with machine guns and light mortars. The cave mouth was 10 feet wide, positioned behind a rocky outcropping that provided defilade from direct fire. Previous infantry assaults had gotten within 50 yards before being cut down. Chen peered through his periscope, calculating distance and elevation. 120 yards. Uphill angle 20 degrees. Wind negligible. Morrison keyed the intercom. Chen, target the cave overhang. Let's see if we can bounce the stream in. It was a technique they had practiced but never used in combat, firing at the rock face above the cave entrance, letting napalm splash and flow downward. If it worked, they could hit targets without direct line of sight. Gunner ready. Fire. The POA-CWS system erupted with a sound witnesses described as a freight train made of fire. Compressed nitrogen propelled jellied gasoline through the nozzle at 300 feet per second. The electric igniter transformed the liquid into a burning stream 40 feet wide at impact. The napalm struck the rock overhang, splattered, and cascaded down across the cave entrance like a fiery waterfall. For 3 seconds, the cave mouth disappeared behind a curtain of flame. Then the screaming started. Japanese soldiers emerged from the smoke, uniforms burning, stumbling forward into American machine gun fire. Some dropped after 3 steps. Others ran 20 yards before collapsing. One soldier, completely engulfed, somehow maintained enough awareness to pull the pin on a grenade before dying, the explosion adding to the chaos. The entire sequence lasted 45 seconds from first flame to last gunshot. When the smoke cleared, the cave entrance was still burning, napalm clinging to rock and soil, feeding on oxygen and anything combustible. Morrison's radio crackled, "Phoenix lead, this is company commander. Infantry moving forward to secure objective." 3 minutes later, Objective Bravo secure. 53 enemy Kia, no prisoners, no friendly casualties. Morrison felt the weight of what that meant. 53 men, incinerated or shot while fleeing incineration, in less than a minute. War reduced to industrial process. Russo, the driver, broke the silence. For targets down, couple hundred to go. He tried to sound casual but failed. They moved to the next objective. Over 6 hours, Iron Phoenix and its 4 sister tanks destroyed 18 fortified positions. The 77th Infantry Division advanced 800 yards, more progress than the previous week combined. But the Japanese were learning. By late afternoon, concealed anti-tank guns were targeting the flame tank specifically. Scorched Earth took a 47mm hit to its track, immobilizing it. The crew continued firing from their stationary position while Marine engineers worked under fire to repair the track. Hell's Rain had its periscope destroyed by rifle fire, temporarily blinding the driver until they could replace it. The tanks were powerful but not invincible. That evening, Morrison's platoon pulled back for refueling and maintenance. 400 gallons of napalm provided roughly 80 seconds of continuous fire. In practice, gunners fired in short 3 to 5 second bursts to conserve fuel and maintain accuracy. Still, after 6 hours of combat, all 5 tanks were running on fumes. The refueling process took 3 hours. Specialized fuel trucks mixed the gasoline, diesel, and napalm powder in precise ratios. Too much gasoline, and the mixture burned too fast, reducing range. Too much diesel, and it wouldn't ignite properly. Too much napalm, and it became too viscous to flow through the system. The mixture had to be used within 48 hours or it would separate. Marine engineers had established forward fuel depots every 2 miles, stockpiling thousands of gallons in rubberized bladders. The logistical challenge of keeping 5 flame tanks operational was staggering. Each tank consumed roughly 4,000 gallons per week. Multiply that by 10 weeks of sustained combat, and the supply chain requirements became clear. Every gallon had to be shipped from Hawaii, unloaded at the beach, transported to forward depots under artillery fire, mixed on-site, and pumped into tanks. One broken link in that chain, and the tanks became expensive pillboxes. While his tank refueled, Morrison walked among the infantry who they had supported. The reaction was unanimous, gratitude mixed with horror. One sergeant approached him, hand extended. "You boys saved a lot of lives today." Then, quieter, "That's a hell of a way to kill someone." Morrison had no answer. That night, lying on his bedroll beside Iron Phoenix, Morrison reviewed the day's action. 18 positions destroyed. Estimated 180 Japanese casualties, though accurate counts were impossible when napalm consumed bodies entirely. 0 American fatalities in his sector. By any objective measure, a successful day. So why did his hands shake when he closed his eyes? Private O'Brien, the loader, sat down beside him. "Can't sleep either, Sarge. Just thinking. About what we did to those Japs." Morrison nodded. Someone had to do it. Conventional weapons weren't working. "How many Marines died last week trying to take positions we cleared today?" O'Brien was quiet for a moment. "Doesn't make it easier, does it?" "No. It doesn't." April 17th brought rain and revelation. Japanese commanders had issued emergency orders regarding flame tanks: avoid direct engagement, target them with indirect artillery fire, use terrain to limit their approach angles, and deploy suicide assault teams at night. That last tactic would be attempted at 0300 hours. Morrison was awake when the mortar rounds started falling, not on the tanks directly but on the perimeter around them. A distraction. Then came the satchel charges. 15 Japanese soldiers, explosives strapped to their bodies, emerged from previously undetected spider holes within the American perimeter. They had been hiding underground for days, waiting for this moment. 3 rushed Iron Phoenix. Russo, on guard duty, opened fire with his Thompson submachine gun, dropping 2. The third closed to within 10 feet before Corporal Kim shot him. The satchel charge exploded, but at enough distance that it only scarred the tank's armor. Fury's child was less fortunate. 2 attackers reached the engine compartment simultaneously. Their combined explosion killed the entire crew, 5 men, and destroyed the tank. By dawn, the Japanese assault had been repelled, but at terrible cost. 12 Marines dead, 27 wounded, and 1 flame tank destroyed. The platoon was down to 4 tanks. Morrison attended the memorial service for Fury's child's crew. He had known them for 3 months, trained with them, shared rations and jokes and fears. Now they were names on a casualty list. The chaplain spoke about sacrifice and duty and honor. Morrison heard the words but felt their inadequacy. What honor was there in being blown apart while sleeping beside your tank? What glory in dying not from enemy soldiers but from explosives carrying corpses? The war had become something beyond traditional concepts of combat. April 18th through May 1st was a grinding repetition of advance, burn, secure, advance. The flame tanks became the spearhead of every assault. Japanese positions that would have required days of artillery prep and costly infantry assault now fell in hours. Kakazu Ridge, which had stopped the American advance for a week, was secured in 3 days once flame tanks were properly integrated. But the cost was accumulating in ways that didn't appear in casualty reports. Chen, the gunner, became obsessed with fuel efficiency, calculating exactly how many seconds of flame each target required, trying to optimize the killing process. Kim stopped eating regularly, claiming he wasn't hungry but really unable to stomach food after seeing what napalm did to human bodies. Russo developed a tremor in his right hand that worsened after each engagement. O'Brien stopped talking except when necessary. And Morrison felt himself becoming something he didn't recognize, someone who could calculate enemy deaths in gallons of napalm consumed, who could eat lunch 30 minutes after incinerating 70 men in a cave. The battle's geography shifted southward. Kakazu Ridge fell, then the next defensive line, then the next. Each position was more sophisticated than the last. By early May, the American advance was approaching Shuri Castle, the heart of Japanese defenses. Lieutenant General Ueshijima's strategy was working, not in preventing American victory but in making it so costly that each yard was paid for in blood and broken mines. On May 4, the Japanese launched a massive counterattack, attempting to break through American lines and reach the supply beaches. It was a deviation from Ueshijima's defensive strategy, ordered by Tokyo over his objections. The attack failed catastrophically. 5,000 Japanese soldiers died in 2 days, many cut down by American artillery before reaching the front lines. The flame tanks played a supporting role, burning out staging areas and destroying ammunition dumps. One incident from the counterattack haunted Morrison more than anything else. Iron Phoenix was tasked with clearing a village where Japanese troops had concentrated. As Chen fired into a building, civilians emerged, women, children, elderly. They had been sheltering inside, unaware Japanese soldiers were using the structure. The napalm didn't discriminate. Morrison ordered Chen to cease fire immediately, but 3 seconds of flame had already been released. 7 Okinawan civilians died. War crimes investigations would later determine the deaths were accidental, the civilians' presence unknown, the engagement within rules of combat. Legally blameless. Morally unbearable. Morrison filed a report detailing exactly what happened. His commanding officer read it, set it aside, and said, "Sergeant, in war, terrible things happen to innocent people. You cannot hold yourself responsible for every tragedy." But Morrison did. After Shuri fell in late May, Japanese forces retreated to the southern tip of the island for a final stand. The terrain was even more favorable for defense, steep hills, narrow valleys, heavy vegetation that limited tank mobility. The flame tanks continued their work, but the opposition was fanatical. By June, organized Japanese resistance was collapsing into small unit actions and individual holdouts. Some Japanese soldiers chose suicide over surrender. Others fought until killed. A few, their numbers growing as defeat became undeniable, surrendered. It was during this final phase that Morrison encountered something unexpected, a Japanese officer who wanted to talk. Iron Phoenix was advancing through a valley when a white cloth appeared from a cave entrance. Morrison, suspecting a trap, kept the tank's guns trained on the position while calling for an interpreter. The Japanese officer who emerged was Lieutenant Takashi Sato, 42 years old, a career soldier who had fought in China since 1937. He carried no weapons, only a folder of documents. Through the interpreter, Sato explained that he commanded 40 men in the cave complex. They had no ammunition, limited water, and no hope of relief. He was surrendering his unit on one condition: he wanted to understand the weapon that had defeated them. Morrison, against doctrine but driven by curiosity, agreed to meet face to face. They sat on opposite sides of a field telephone wire, 2 soldiers who might have been friends in another life. Sato spoke through the interpreter: "Your flame tank is the most effective weapon you have deployed. Not your aircraft, not your battleships. This tank." Why? Morrison struggled to answer. "We needed a way to defeat fortified positions without massive casualties." Sato nodded slowly. "You have succeeded. My men, brave soldiers with years of combat experience, will not fight against your flame weapon. They see it approach and choose surrender or suicide. Never before have Japanese soldiers made such choices in large numbers. Your weapon breaks something beyond physical defenses. It breaks the spirit. Does that make it wrong?" Morrison asked, surprising himself with the question. Sato considered carefully. In war, effectiveness and morality are not always aligned. Your weapon is effective because it is horrible. But is fire more horrible than being torn apart by artillery? Is burning worse than drowning in a sinking ship? Death is death. Perhaps the horror we feel is not about the method but about the intimacy. Your tank must approach closely. The operator sees his targets as individuals, not grid coordinates. That intimacy makes the act more personal, more difficult to justify as merely following orders. They talked for 2 hours, comparing experiences, discussing tactics, acknowledging the absurdity of war. When Sato's 40 men emerged from the cave to surrender, Morrison ensured they were treated properly, given water and medical care, transported to POW camps without abuse. It was the least he could do. June 21, 1945. The Battle of Okinawa was declared over. 82 days of combat had cost 12,500 American lives and 77,000 wounded. Japanese losses approached 110,000 military dead plus perhaps 100,000 Okinawan civilians, caught between armies that gave them no sanctuary. Morrison's flame tank platoon had been reduced from 5 tanks to 3. Fury's Child destroyed in April. Demon's Breath knocked out by anti-tank fire in May, crew surviving but tank unrepairable. The remaining 3 tanks had consumed 340,000 gallons of napalm mixture, destroyed over 600 fortified positions, and contributed to an estimated 8,000 Japanese casualties. Statistics that meant nothing and everything. The tank crews were evacuated to Hawaii for rest and refitting before the planned invasion of Japan itself. That invasion would never come. In August, atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Japan surrendered. The war was over, and Morrison would never have to climb into a tank again. He returned to Detroit, resumed his job as a firefighter, married, raised 3 children, and lived a quiet life. He never attended veteran reunions. He never spoke about the war except once, 2 weeks before his death from lung cancer in 1997. His grandson, a high school student researching World War II, asked what he did in the war. Morrison, knowing he had limited time left, decided his grandson deserved the truth. I commanded a flamethrower tank on Okinawa. We burned Japanese soldiers out of caves. It was effective. It saved American lives. It was the most horrible thing you can imagine. I did it for 76 days, and not a day since then have I forgotten the sounds of men dying in fire. His grandson asked the obvious question, do you regret it? Morrison's answer was careful, regret implies I had a choice. I didn't. The war was happening. Men were dying. I used the weapon I was given to accomplish the mission and protect my crew. But am I proud of it? No. Pride is for things that ennoble you. This diminished me. It diminished all of us. We did what was necessary, but necessary and right are not synonyms. The flame tanks of Okinawa were eventually scrapped, their metal recycled into peacetime products. The weapons that had been so effective in war had no place in peace. By 1978, the last American flamethrower tanks were retired, replaced by other technologies that could destroy fortifications without the intimate horror of burning enemies alive. But the legacy persisted in doctrine and memory. The integration of specialized armor with infantry, the emphasis on combined arms coordination, the recognition that technological innovation could break tactical stalemates, these lessons shaped American military thinking for generations. And in the memories of the men who crewed those tanks, the weight of what they had done remained forever. Today, few remember the flame tanks of Okinawa. History focuses on the atomic bombs that ended the war, the kamikazes that terrorized the fleet, the Marines raising the flag on Iwo Jima. The men who crewed Iron Phoenix, Hell's Rain, and Scorched Earth became footnotes, their contribution acknowledged in technical manuals but absent from popular narratives. Perhaps that's appropriate. Their weapon was too horrible for glorification, too effective for dismissal. They existed in the moral gray zone that combat creates, doing terrible things for defensible reasons, saving lives by taking lives, protecting innocence through acts that stripped away their own innocence. Technical Sergeant William Morrison died on September 3, 1997. His obituary mentioned his fire department service and his family. It did not mention that he had commanded a weapon that killed thousands, saved thousands, and haunted him for 52 years. At his funeral, his grandson found among his possessions a single photograph, 5 men standing beside a Sherman tank somewhere in the Pacific. On the back, in Morrison's handwriting, Iron Phoenix Crew. Okinawa 1945. We did what we had to do. No names. No pride. No regret. Just the simple acknowledgement of duty performed under circumstances that tested the limits of what duty could demand. The flame tanks are gone. The men who crewed them are nearly all gone. But the questions they embody remain. How much horror is acceptable in pursuit of victory? When does the method of killing matter more than the killing itself? Can effectiveness excuse moral injury? These questions have no satisfying answers, only the lived experiences of men like Morrison, who bore the weight of their choices until the day they died. In the end, the flame tanks of Okinawa were exactly what Lieutenant Sato said, effective because they were horrible, necessary because war makes the horrible necessary. They shortened the battle, saved American lives, and left scars on the survivors that never fully healed. Perhaps the truest measure of their impact is not the positions destroyed or casualties inflicted, but the silence of the men who used them, veterans who couldn't speak of their service without confronting the darkness of what they had done in the name of duty, honor, and survival.